Hi, I'm Chris Sarandon, and welcome to Cooking by Heart, where we revisit the vivid memories of the food we grew up with.
I couldn't believe the tastes and the flavors.
Lydia Bastianich. Hi, Chris. Susan Sarandon.
And, of course, the people and the stories attached to that time in our lives.
You know, I've been dying to chop this up with you for a while now.
Yeah.
How would you Julia Child? This is a lovely chocolate macadamia nut truffle that has dark chocolate. You can get it in milk chocolate too. I prefer the dark.
Alice Waterman.
I was the one, sort of like mommy dearest.
And he'd order one side of the menu and eat that. And then when he was finished eating that, he'd order the other side of the menu and eat all of that. Emptied the kitchen.
Food is the thing. Come on. Champagne.
My guest today is multiple award-winning writer-producer John Markus. John began his career in high school supplying jokes about his rural Ohio hometown to Broadway columnist Earl Wilson. After graduating from Stanford University, he moved to Los Angeles, where he landed a job as a writer on a revival of the animated Mighty Mouse. After an assignment on Paramount's Taxi television series, Markus joined the original writing staff of The Cosby Show. Promoted to supervising producer after the first 6 episodes, he returned for the show's second season as co-executive producer and showrunner. During his tenure, he wrote or co-wrote 67 episodes, earning an Emmy Award, a Peabody Award, back-to-back Humanitas Awards, and a People's Choice Award for the greatest sitcom of all time. He next co-created the Cosby spin-off A Different World, and then the critically acclaimed Late Line with Al Franken for NBC. He also was a consulting producer on The Larry Sanders Show, co-writing the Emmy-nominated Ellen DeGeneres episode, Ellen, Is She or Isn't She? And his play, The Fabulous Lipitones, the story of a barbershop quartet that loses its lead singer to a strenuously high B-flat, has had 8 separate productions within 2 years. Markus has also directed The Kings of Barbecue, BBQ Kuwait, an award-winning documentary film chronicling the mission of attempting to serve authentic-style barbecue to our troops stationed in Kuwait. He also executive produced the Destination America series, BBQ Pitmasters, which takes the first in-depth look at the world of competition barbecue, and we will discuss the transition between his life in sitcoms and his barbecue obsession. But first of all, I'm thrilled to introduce John Markus to Cooking by Heart. Welcome, John.
I'm thrilled at the length of my introduction.
Well, I don't stint on introductions. I think they're very important. And also, it puts the guest in a great mood.
I am in a great mood, but would you forgive me if I gave one revision?
Oh, please.
The Lipitones currently have had 23 productions around the United States. The Fabulous Lipitones. So I have to add that because it's something I'm very proud of.
Oh, I would think so. Think so. So the first thing we do when we start the show is provenance, where we're from. And with you, it's very important, I know. Please tell us about where you're from and how it influenced what you ate, first of all.
I'm from a small town in central Ohio called London, Ohio. My parents are immigrants, and which is the first thing you and I started talking about when we really in depth started discussing this.
Yeah.
They settled there for reasons that would be in another podcast, maybe, to get into their background.
Well, no, let's talk a little bit about why.
Well, both my parents are survivors, so they ended up like immigrating to America in the early 50s from Norway. My mom was Czech, raised in Prague, and my father born and raised a Norwegian.
Mm.
Unusual for a Jewish family to be Norwegians, but his father was Russian. Mm-hmm. So during the pogroms, the Jews left parts of Lithuania, what's now called Lithuania, ended up around the world, and Norway, rural Norway was one of them. So they ended up in London, Ohio, because my mother wanted to come to America to be the next Edith Head. That was her dream.
For those of my listeners and viewers who don't know who Edith Head was, she was one of the great, if not the greatest, costume designer during the golden years in Hollywood, right?
That's right. The closest my mom got was to do the London, Ohio PTA play costumes. But she was an artist of some national repute.
Oh, yeah?
She was an enamelist. And so her artwork was a great release for her. So she found herself basically immersed more and more in the world of her art because the hometown I was raised in was, as she would call in her Czech accent, lots of hillbillies. But she loved it there, but she loved the people, but she had a hillbilly because she was raised in a cosmopolitan city. And
Yeah.
she was just a snob about things.
Interesting that she considered it a hillbilly town. Was it for want of a better word, someplace where the usual modes of endeavor were workmen? They were what, miners?
No, it was that, like an Ohio town bordering on West Virginia would be what you're talking about. There are varying kinds of hillbillies. If we were allowed to just sort of get into the spectrum of hillbilliness,
we don't have to. I mean, I grew up in a hillbilly town as well. I'm from West Virginia,
you're from there.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We weren't part of it. We were Central Ohio, so there was no mining there. But it was the classic Midwestern farm community,
right?
So that's the agricultural version of not as they were called ridge runners, like you're talking about, the people that made moonshine and stuff. We weren't. You grew up around some of the White Lightning, didn't you?
Oh, are you kidding? Every year at Christmas time, the captain of the state trooper contingent in my hometown would walk in with a 5-gallon jug of moonshine for my dad. And my dad would make eggnog for all the customers with it.
Wow. So barbecue, which we'll get to, was my first experience with moonshine because and the Pitmasters would bring their homemade stuff to the contest.
Oh.
And you'd stand in a circle. And this was my first time with it.
Yeah.
And the Pitmaster handed me the jug and said, "Careful, son, it can stop your heart."
I love it.
I sipped very delicately.
Yes, right.
I need to make sure that, because maybe people from my hometown are listening, they think like, well, where does he get off calling us hillbillies?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I am one of them.
Yes.
And I cherish and embrace those roots because they've given me an understanding of the center of the country, the deeper part of the Midwest. So I'm very grateful that I have this.
As I do as well. I feel very much the same way.
We're not some of these East Coasters, getting off on putting people down.
No. But there was a time when, as I was growing up, that I thought, oh gosh, I want to be more sophisticated. I don't want to be part of this. And the older I got, the more I appreciated, first of all, the bedrock values, which are to be very much admired, and also the extraordinary cultural traditions that come with it.
And food is among them.
So let's get to that. Tell me about your mom and your dad. Were either of them cooks? Did they bring the cuisine of their home countries with them?
Yes. But, at the time, the Norwegian cuisine was basically either boiled salmon with boiled potatoes and strawberries for dessert. That was the big dish when I was a kid growing up. And we were taken to Norway on a regular basis to be with my cousins. Oh. So I got that Norwegian. Now, my mother was very much an Eastern European cook. So I grew up, all my friends thought like, well, if I can get over to the Markus house, I can have these like exotic delicacies. Mm-hmm. So she would just lower a tongue in a pot of water and cook them. Yep. And which, there are plenty of cow tongues back there in Ohio. She also would make chicken paprikash, which is an Eastern European dish.
Mm-hmm.
She would make a dumpling. Gosh, I wish I knew the name of it. Maybe one of your listeners does. A dumpling that was so light and tender, she had to cut it with a thread.
Oh.
And it had caraway seeds in it. It's a Czech dumpling.
Oh. Ooh.
I know.
I got a frisson there. Just as you're describing the thread going through the dumpling. Mm.
Yeah. I just remember her with, after all the work, she wasn't in love with cooking.
Mm.
It was obligatory to her. She had to do it. And she was one of these moms, I'm sure at the time there are others like her, who didn't want anyone else in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And didn't want us cleaning either.
Oh, really?
No, it was like we just were worthless when it came to this. So I had to come to my love of cooking later. I didn't get it from watching her preparing with her heart. You know, you can always taste if there's love in food or anger.
Interesting.
Now, angry food can be really tasty. Go to any French restaurant and there's a 1 in 3 chance you're going to get angry food, but it's damn good. She served angry food.
Well, that's because of the technique. La technique.
La technique. And, you know, there's an atmosphere, at least in the older kitchens. Now in the more modern kitchens, you don't abuse people. You don't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So she wasn't happy in her marriage and in her general life there. She just wasn't. But because she was a survivor, you often have to go through post-war years. You don't have a lot of choices. And that's how she looked at it.
Yeah. It's interesting that very much, particularly of the generation of our parents, that I hear so many stories about unhappy women in the kitchen. Michael Patrick King, famous quote that I keep repeating, pardon me, folks, if you've heard it, but he says that the only time there was any flavor in the food was when his mother cried into the mashed potatoes.
I like that line. That's a really good line.
Isn't that a great line?
Yeah. And you know what? I bet that I got to taste that and didn't quite know where the flavor came from.
What it was.
Yeah.
Right.
Except in the case of the food that I was served, there were tears in every dish. Not to revise a very good joke, but yeah, we got a lot of tears there.
Right. So that was the leitmotif.
Yes. The irony is that my father loved my mother's cooking. And whenever we'd go out to eat, which was fairly rare, I'll tell you the one exception we did regularly, but he would, whenever we went out to eat, he would taste the food and say, "It's not your mother's cooking."
Oh, interesting.
And she resented hearing that.
Really?
Because it wasn't something she wanted to be doing. So the fact that he liked it so much, it's like, just pissed her off. He would get a dirty look for saying that. Now, if you were to meet my mom, you would be charmed by her. She was very kind of coquettish and eccentric. You know, going back to the whole hillbilly thing, she would wear New York clothes. She would get an occasional trip to New York where she would buy, you know, haute couture. I remember being a kid in the late 70s, early 80s, she'd come back from these trips with Manolo Blahnik shoes.
Whoa. Wow. When they weren't Manolo Blahnik shoes. I mean, when they weren't in the culture.
Sex in the City shoes.
Yeah.
So she would like open the box surreptitiously. She'd say, "Come here, Johnny." And she'd open up the box and she'd go, "Look." And she'd pull these out and she'd go, "I'm going to show you what they cost too.
Ooh.
And don't tell your father." And she wore those shoes until she was in her early 80s. She wore those shoes knowing she'd be falling down in them. But they'd go on anyway. She
like, God damn it, I'm going to wear these shoes.
That's right. I may break a kneecap, but I'm going to look good. My ass will be perky.
Right.
That's my mom. That is my mom. So God love her. So going back to one cuisine thing.
Yeah.
Once a week, we'd pile into my dad's DeSoto, his car with the big fins, you know, and with push button controls.
Oh, yeah. We had a Chrysler like that. Yeah.
And we would head off to Columbus, Ohio, which was a 27-mile drive down in Interstate 40, which was a country highway then. And we would go to a Chinese restaurant in Columbus. That's where we'd head every Sunday. The restaurant was called Ding Ho, in quotes. The neon sign said, you know, Ding Ho, and then translates the best. Now, I've talked to people that speak Mandarin. They go, no, it doesn't.
No. Right.
That's what they did in Columbus. And, you know, a family of 5, which we were, could eat at a place like Ding Ho in the late 50s, early 60s for about $28, right?
Yeah.
So we're driving out of town, and my dad would check his wallet when we were at the city limits. And if he saw he didn't have enough money, he would just pull off into a driveway and make a house call. He was a doctor.
Really?
And it was a house that didn't call him.
Right. You're kidding.
But he was, I'm putting this in a play that I'm writing about them.
Yeah.
But when Dr. Markus knocks on your door, somebody's sick.
Somebody's got to be sick.
Someone's going to be sick.
You better be.
And Dad would go treat them.
Wow.
With real care.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd pocket $30. And he'd say, let's go eat.
This is a great scene.
I know.
Great scene.
He was kind of both a healer and a flim-flam artist.
Oh, how so? Well,
making a house call where people weren't sick? What do you call that? It's, he's going to make money for dinner.
Right. But Dad had no interest in being in the kitchen. Now, I was just thinking as you were describing your mother's reaction to your dad and your dad's reaction to your mother's food, that it made sense in a way if he was brought up with boiled salmon and boiled potatoes.
Yes.
That her cooking was exotic.
It was exotic and extremely satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Because, Norwegians really are born athletes.
Yeah.
They're smokers too, many of them. Although I was there last summer, much less so now. They don't smoke. But they're cooking what's available to them because their growing season is so short and the salmon's plentiful. And the cuisine there now, of course, is way more sophisticated. And Scandinavian cooks, amazing.
Yeah. Now some of the best chefs in the world.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But what he loved about Mom's cooking was it was hearty. It was like, Dad would eat like it's winter all year round. He wanted the boiled meat. He wanted the slow cooked, he wanted the braised meat. He wanted that. He would then go to the refrigerator for the end of the meal and he'd get out a small jar of lingonberries.
Ah, yes.
Very Norwegian dish.
Yes.
And every meal to him should be finished off with lingonberries mixed into the food and then removed from the plate with his knife, which he would just basically lick off. Something that Mom really enjoyed watching, too.
I'll bet she did.
This is like, years of therapy, and I can finally talk about this stuff without breaking something. They were quite a pair, the two of them.
Yeah. So did your friends considered Mom's cooking exotic as well?
Loved it. They loved coming to the Markus house. But, here we started playing music early, my brother and I, and we had a band all through high school.
Right.
And
now, but it was a Dixieland band, right?
Dixieland swing, if we were going to go wild, we'd play some Chicago, or Blood, Sweat and Tears if we were going to get a little crazy. But yeah, we played around town. We had a lot of gigs around town because there was no entertainment available in my town. When we got known as a band, the phone would ring at the house. And here I was about 17 or 16 answering the phone. And no one, the voice on the other end wouldn't say hi or anything, but just would say, how much entertainment can I get for $75? And I'd just say, well, we'll play 2 sets.
Yeah.
All right, be at Route 38, 1238 on Thursday night. We're doing a square dance. So we learned how to play square dances. We were constantly out and about with our music. And so, Dad came to tolerate that we were entertainers around town.
And that was really the beginning of the writing career as well, yeah?
It was. I started writing little sketches for the group, between sets, little comedy sketches that we could do.
Oh, really? You performed comedy sketches?
Yeah, we were,
at the gigs?
We were shameless. And really, I dread to think that there's tape somewhere of that stuff, but we did it and people laughed. And I thought like, well, this is kind of great. And then I started reading about, I grew up watching the Dick Van Dyke Show. And so that looked like a pretty good life. Living in Westchester and having Mary Tyler Moore as your partner.
Yeah.
And,
as your muse.
And I don't know the writers' rooms there, the way they portrayed it, I wasn't quite certain about that, in that it was a little too writerly. I just didn't know exactly what I'd be getting into. But yeah, that inspired me to get to. So I started sending those jokes, as you mentioned, off to Earl Wilson.
Why Earl Wilson?
Because Earl was from Columbus, Ohio.
Ah.
And I had read that Woody Allen first got his jokes published by writing for Earl Wilson, getting a byline for Earl Wilson. And I thought, well, Woody's...
And you were aware of Woody Allen at that point in your life?
Yeah, it was in the early 70s, like 71. He had just kind of come on the scene with Sleeper and Bananas.
Right.
Bananas actually the first one. Yeah.
There's more comic films, the early ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was an inspiration. As you talk to any comedy writer, they're going to say that Woody was a major force.
Anything else on television other than Dick Van Dyke?
We watched primetime cartoons because they used to put cartoons on in the afternoon. And then I used to come home from school and turn on the Merv Griffin show.
Ah.
Because I was very excited by New York show business. I love the idea of, then you'd go to Toots Shor's and have a few, and then go do your show at night, whether you wrote it or you were in it on Broadway. And somehow I was very attracted to New York show business. It just seemed glamorous to me. Mm-hmm. Now you talk to people who are in New York show business.
We went through it at the time, more of the sweet smell of success than it was the sort of ideal picture.
Ideal picture. It's like the panel on What's My Line.
Ah, yes. Can you name the panel members?
Oh, well, do
you remember them?
I remember Tom Poston. Gary Moore was one, wasn't he? Gary Moore was the host.
Oh, that's right.
He was the host.
Arlene Francis, was she one?
Yes, Arlene Francis won. Bennett Cerf,
right. Very
a literary guy on a
high-tone people.
I know. It's like, I'll wear my tweed with patches on it, and maybe I'll live in Connecticut. That was my fantasy. I have the tweed jacket over there, but I can't find any time to wear it.
For me, it was the show of shows.
Oh, that's like the height. I mean, that was a little before.
That was a little earlier, yeah.
Yeah, a little earlier.
I'm showing my age.
Well, you can just take kind of consolation in the fact that you look better than me.
Well, that's not necessarily true, but thank you for saying that. Speaking of Woody Allen, that's where Woody Allen started too, right?
Woody was in the writer's room with Mel Brooks.
Neil Simon
and Larry Gelbart. These are giants. These are like this is like the Mount Rushmore of comedy.
The Pantheon. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And we're missing the woman's name too. There was a woman writer who was part of, Neil Simon represented that in the play he did, The Laughter on the 23rd Floor. Mm-hmm. Sorry, we don't remember her name.
Shame on us, yeah.
But she was right there,
Yep.
So I got interested in that, and then Earl Wilson started publishing my jokes, which were all about how small my town was.
Do you remember any of them?
Well, I don't know if they're going to translate, but I do actually remember a couple of them. I remember saying that our zip code only had 4 numbers. And I remember saying that with all the tractors driving into town, we had so many potholes that my spare got a flat. Things like that.
Yeah.
Enough to get published by Earl Wilson.
Right.
And I wrote him a note and said, I'm coming to New York with my mother. I'd like to meet you. And the fucking guy wrote me back. Pardon me for saying that, but he wrote me back and he said, okay. He was complete by the business because he was like one of those beat reporters for most of his life on Broadway before he got the column.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, kid, meet me on Friday the 12th at Gallagher's Steakhouse at 5 p.m.
Wow.
And I go there. I'm 16 years old. And I go there, and there's Earl Wilson, who was a fairly famous person at the time. Mm-hmm. He's sitting at the bar, and I sit down, I order a Coke, and he gives me advice. He asks me questions about what I want to write. Who do I see my... Good questions.
Well, how extraordinary.
He writes a column about it. Huh. There's a column about my meeting with Earl Wilson that he wrote.
Wow.
So all of a sudden, my head is filled with, my dad didn't like any of this going on.
Oh, totally understandable if your dad was anything like mine. When I graduated from college as an actor, my dad turned to my mother and said, now what the hell is he going to do?
Yeah, we may have had interchangeable fathers.
Yeah.
My father's favorite thing to say to me when this dream started to become sort of a reality, and I was talking about it more and more, and listening to his talk about going to med school less and less.
Mm-hmm.
He liked saying to me, you know something? You're going to cost me money the rest of your life. No irony there either.
No, none.
None at all.
None. No. Pure facts, kid.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
this escalated when you went to college. That is your contributing to famous people's joke basket, as it were.
Joke basket. Because a lot of famous comedians or nationally known comedians would have writers around the stringers, basically, for their comedy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how it happened. I think I wrote her a letter, but I started getting checks at my Stanford P.O. box from Joan Rivers.
What?
I would send Joan 2 pages of jokes, and she'd send me a check. She'd circle the ones, send them back, and send me a check.
Per joke?
Per joke. Bob Hope started giving me money.
How did you meet Bob Hope?
Here's how I met Bob. Thank God for small town Ohio. Bob Hope, I think at the time, so this would have had to have been 1973, summer, Ohio State Fair, grandstand filled with, often great acts would come through the State Fair grandstands.
Oh, the State Fairs were a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if they still are. Probably most of the acts are country acts, at least through the Midwest and stuff. But we used to get headliners.
Yeah.
Bob Hope there. And I was working at a TV experiment in Columbus, Ohio by Warner Cable. It was a TV experiment about interactive TV, and I'd gotten a job working on it, writing a few things on it. And the person who was one of the producers at the cable experiment said, I can get you backstage. So I stayed up for a couple of nights, and I wrote all these current jokes for Bob Hope, and they ushered me into a trailer behind the stage. And Bob was standing there with Miss Ohio. And it was probably not the best time to send in a 17-year-old with an envelope. Right. He goes, yeah, kid, what is it? I got called kid until about 3 years ago, a lot. It was not like there was any clothing missing. He was back there with her.
And he was known for that kind of
known. Yeah, he was known for that. Yes, he was. And I said, Mr. Hope, I wrote material for you. I know you're here, not to do now, but please look at it. I'd like to write comedy. And he said, kid, I don't know what to do with the envelope. I'm about to go on. I can't. I'll tell you what. He takes a pen from somebody, a marker, and he writes his home address on the envelope. And he says, stick it in the mail. And that was it. I was out of it.
Yeah. But just the fact that he wrote his home address.
It was kind of great.
Extraordinary.
Yeah, it was a great thing. And I was working at the local hospital, my father, thinking there was still hope for me to become something, got me a job as the assistant to the pharmacist in this small 60-bed hospital. And I used to go to work. I have to be at work every morning at 8 a.m. to help the pharmacist. I would go to other towns and from their hospitals, pick up medicine that we needed and all that stuff. I used to joke to my mom as I was leaving in the morning, hey, listen, if Hope calls, tell him I'll get back to him. Right. And then one day I came home from work. She said, Bob Hope called. Here's his number.
What?
I couldn't believe it. And I called him. He answered. His secretary put me through.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, read your jokes, kid. There's some keepers here. I like them. I'm going to be performing in San Francisco night after tomorrow, and in New York night after tomorrow, and I need jokes on the following topics. So I'm scribbling furiously down. I had to write some Jackie Onassis jokes. I remember that, Jimmy Carter jokes, and I stayed up for 2 nights in a row again, and decided the only way to get these jokes to him was to get on a plane and fly to New York. So I fly to New York with an envelope under my hand. He had told me he was staying at the Waldorf.
Yep.
I got to the hotel at 10 in the morning, and I sat in the lobby for 7 hours. He walks in with Dolores, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "You wanted the jokes." And he said, "Oh, come on up to the room." And we go up to the room. This is like I'm 17 at the time, actually. And we go to the desk. You can imagine the suite Bob Hope used to get at the Waldorf.
Yeah, right.
Pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
He had a study, and we sat at the desk, and he went through the jokes, and he checked the ones he liked, and he showed them to me, and he told me why he liked them. And then he said, "That's great. Do some more." And then he said, "Let's take a walk." So we got on the elevator. I asked him what the secret was to his youthfulness. And he said, golf and a hard bed. It worked for him.
Yeah.
And we got on the elevator. We talked a little bit about the great leading ladies he'd gotten to do movies with. Somehow we got into that. Then we took a walk in the blocks around there. And he started talking about Bing Crosby a little bit with me because they were talking about another road picture. And we stopped in front of a Hart, Schaffner, and Mark's clothing store, which was a big line of men's clothing.
Yeah.
And he just looked at me and he said, "Kid, never wear double-breasted." Okay, gotta go. And that was it. That was it. So during the following year or two, I would keep sending him stuff, and he sent me a check.
That's an extraordinary event. First of all, it's a great story. And also, this kind of thing just doesn't happen.
Not
to people.
anymore.
Not anymore. Definitely not anymore. In the age of the internet, we're also hyper aware of trolling and people, wanting to get into show business who really don't belong in show business.
Right. People feel more entitled to it.
Yep. They feel that it belongs to them because it's available.
That's right. And they've grown up often. And two, I don't want to sound like grandpa.
That's all right.
But been a lot of changes, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I've been again every one of them. That's my favorite grandpa line.
Yeah.
There was a period in our history and culture where apprenticeship was a part of it, no matter what you did.
Yeah.
Whether it was an actor or there was sort of a learning period where if you were lucky enough, you met someone who could share that with you. Yeah. Now I think it's less so. And people, who are getting in think like they go right into, where's my job?
Yeah. Yes. It's as true in acting as it is in writing. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's about celebrity as well.
And it's about celebrity.
Not about the craft of doing whatever it is that you need to learn how to do.
Yes. It's less about what you're doing and more about being seen.
Yeah.
And that's a shame because the craft itself begins to dissipate.
Yep.
And I'm going to get all emotional now. Not the good old. I don't know. If I don't want people to know how old I am, I'm not going to start talking like this. Everything's great.
Just don't be again it. Whatever you do, don't be again it. Yes. Every once in a while when I'd come up with something like that, my wife would say, "Now, Abner, just relax.
That's it.
Take it easy." So then you end up, after this foray to New York and college, obviously, you end up going to Los Angeles sort of on spec.
Yeah. All the people. So I graduated college in 78. And this was the time when careers were suddenly emerging as a very important part of your life. Not that they always weren't, but then people being really oriented toward how they're going to make a living and all these things, knowing early when you started. So all my friends, all my colleagues at Stanford, they all had their careers mapped out. They knew they had gotten into med school, they'd gotten into grad schools, they were going to become lawyers or engineers and doctors. Especially at Stanford. This is before show business became so pervasive. And I didn't have any of that. I had no course mapped out for me. I got in my Toyota and drove down to Los Angeles, drove around for a couple of days, stayed with a friend until I found a $200 one-room apartment below the ground at an apartment building. It was subterranean. I'd look up from my one room and there was a window at the top of the room and it just dirt and plants at the top of my room.
Right.
And that's how I started. And I just I sat in there and wrote spec scripts for 2 years.
How did the Mighty Mouse come about?
Well, a person who was actually instrumental in some of the breaks I got, this was a writer who was one of the co-developers of The Simpsons named Sam Simon.
Yeah.
He was a year ahead of me in college, and he reached out to me and said, I can get you a job on Mighty Mouse. And because he was working at the Filmation Studios, which was a small animation studio. This is back in the day, again.
I know.
Back in the day.
I know, Clem.
Before they were doing kaleidoscopes, this
Right.
is back in the day that animation was not digitized or done by computer.
Mm-hmm.
So this small studio, there was a room full of animators there, and there was someone there I fancied. And I'd stop by her desk at 9 a.m. when I was supposed to start work, and she was doing like a 4-fingered hand, because that's the Mighty Mouse had a 4-fingered hand.
Well, that's right.
And it was like, looked like that, just fingers spread. And then when I said goodbye, I stopped by at 5 p.m. to flirt with her, and the hand was closed. That was her day's work.
Wow.
That's her day.
And every panel in between.
Every pen. That's what she had done from 9 to 5.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot of lead time needed for these cartoons, but they needed scripts done. And I was a writer there, and I thought I was doing pretty well. I mean, I learned about Oil Can Harry and Pearl Pure Heart, and writing the adventures of these folks. Then about 6 or 7 months into the job, I got called into the boss's office. I was told, bring your script. Brought it in. He said, John, you've been here a while now, and could you open your script to page 26? And I did. He said, see that line in the middle? Yeah. Mighty would never say that. And I was fired.
Fired?
I fired from Mighty Mouse.
For the God.
I think they were cut back. There were cutbacks.
Yeah, but still.
But but it was with often, as I'm sure you've told people, sometimes being shown the door is the best thing that can happen to you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I have a saying about show business, which is, one of the things when people come to me and talk about what's happened to them and stuff, I say, listen, the thing you always keep in mind is in show business, when one door closes, another door closes.
The wisdom of John Markus, ladies and gentlemen.
Go to John to feel support and encouragement.
Right. So you get hired to work on Taxi.
Yep.
How did the Cosby Show come about?
Well, first of all, again, credit to, the late, great Sam Simon. The reason he left Mighty Mouse was because he'd gotten an opportunity on Taxi. And he liked what I was doing on Mighty Mouse. Yeah, they only hired me because they had a spot, really.
Well, that's how it happens sometimes.
Which can happen.
Yep.
If I had to go and think and predict and somehow map out a career today, I'd be so anxious. Because the things that happen are often accidental.
Serendipitous.
Yeah, and you got to be ready for an opportunity. That's the best you can do.
Yep.
So Sam said, we want you on Taxi. We want you to do an episode on Taxi. It was the final year of the show, and they had me come in. I pitched a few stories, and they assigned one to me. Wrote an episode. It was 5th before the final episode on Taxi, which was never a hit show, interestingly.
Interesting, yeah.
Never a hit show. It was never in the top 10, really. But it was adored by critics and by audiences.
Yeah.
But not enough. The show was dark. Of course, it's the stuff that we kind of like,
Yeah.
The edgy stuff there. And the garage was dirty and dank because that's what they're like.
Yeah, and the characters were, obviously.
Characters were. Yep. Everyone, the great, beautiful theme of Taxi to these writers are, by the way, the Mount Rushmore of character comedy in my book, which will take us to Cosby in a second. But they are all about writing truthfulness. And then funny is second.
Yes.
Go with what's real. Go with your heart.
And character.
And character. No character should be defined by the jokes they make.
Yes.
Let the character tell the truth, and the truth will be funny from the character.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you pull their line out of the dialogue and put it on a separate page, it won't be funny. It's only funny in context of how the scene goes. And for an actor, those are the best lines to play.
Oh, yeah. And there were a lot of wonderful actors on that show.
Oh, yeah. You know, Danny DeVito's story on how he got to be hired as Louis De Palma, which is now a thing of legend. Well, they didn't write the character of that stature.
Yeah.
And all the show creators are sitting there for the auditions to cast the pilot. And they've seen a lot of people at that point. And Danny walks in with the script rolled up in his hand, throws it on the coffee table and says, "Who wrote this shit?" And then he turned and walked out. And then they got him back in, you know. Yep. He rolled the dice with that thing.
Yep.
Writers are only as good as the words. And the actors really can take what you do, if it's good, and make it great. And sometimes, you know, take what's great and make it less good.
Yeah.
You haven't found the right person.
Right. But this is very much a theme of yours in terms of how you work.
Yes. When you hand in a draft, the script is like a finish line and you should be falling over it. In other words, you should be so exhausted, like you've done everything to dig as deep as you can and make it truthful and make it funny, and then find the people that can then take it and go somewhere you don't expect.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard, but that comedy is not in vogue anymore.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know if you could point out a show being done, a new show. We don't even have to get into this, but I think TV has become more referential because it's now in the hands of people that grew up watching TV than original comedy, especially.
Yeah.
Again, it's Abner talking. I'm again all of them.
So tell me, Abner, how did the Cosby Show happen?
Well, the good fortune here, again, you know, luck coming into play. I was really lucky to have had that one episode assigned to me, because then suddenly other people were open to reading my stuff, that I had a taxi credit. And one of those people was the late, great Earl Pomerantz, who was a legendary comedy writer, among which shows he penned were these fantastic Mary Tyler Moore episodes. Head's Heart Attack, which is like one of the funniest ones there. Very memorable moments on Mary. He was from Toronto and came down and fell in with that crowd. And he was writing Cheers episode, Taxi episodes, and Cheers episodes. So he comes from the school of character comedy. He was the original showrunner on The Cosby Show. And there was word there's a show going on. My agents couldn't get him to return calls. So I had met him once and I knew where he lived, and got in that Toyota again and drove to Santa Monica and left my script on his front porch. That's it. There were two hires. There was a team that got hired in me. We all went to Brooklyn to write this show. No one knew how long it was going to last. We all thought it was good, but nobody knew if it was going to really spark an audience.
And obviously it did.
It did. We were number one on the second episode. And stayed number one for 6 years, which is the duration I spent mostly as showrunner. Because Earl left. He didn't like New York. There were things about working with Bill that he didn't like. And he just sort of like, I'm going back to Santa Monica. I don't think I like being here. And then they basically handed the show to me.
You and I have discussed this sort of peripherally, and I don't want to get into it too deeply, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least brush on the subject. And that is, in your time on the show, considering the notoriety and the bad publicity that emanated after the show, was there any of that you felt was sketchy and difficult when you were working on the show?
You know, it's almost painful to think about where the story led for Bill, or where his actions obviously got him there.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, 62 women claiming things, like, you know, one claiming something has to be listened to. But the numbers were really just a terrible thing to read about. What we knew, which turns out to be very little compared to what was going on, there was no real indication, except that he was famous beginning in his 20s, in the early 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when you think about how certain powerful personalities or beloved personalities, famous people, successful people behaved in those days, you know, it became like, well, this is an entitled person because they're famous and they're beloved to a degree. So they're going to take it. It's opportunistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you separate the art from the artist, can you appreciate what they do after?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, so
I mean, there's been a conversation about Picasso. There, you know, any number of people along the way. Yeah.
Many of directors from the golden era of Broadway were not so great in their private lives.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's the here and now. And what we knew was he tended to, we would see him be flirtatious with an actress that was there, and we would be asked to write some extra lines for someone who was going to be on the show that we hadn't heard of. And we just sort of, without knowing the depths of what might have been going on, we just sort of, well, this is, obviously he's mentoring somebody.
Right, quote unquote. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, you and I have a late, great mutual friend, Jay Sandrich,
yes,
who was one of the really biggest influences in my career and great supporter of mine. And I love this guy and miss him all the time because of the craft. He stood for the craft.
Oh, yeah.
I'm the one that brought him the news that Bill had been accused of these things. We were having dinner in New York. He looked at me shocked. Now, Jay had a real idea of who Bill was. He clearly did. He worked on the show for 4 years.
Sure.
But he was shocked. And he said to me, you know, if I would have known he was doing that, I would have walked. I think the show would have fallen apart.
Oh, absolutely. Sure.
It's very controversial. You know, in the first week of the show, and here I was, this young puppy, excited to be on my first TV staff. The first week of the show, walked up to Bill and said, hey, you know, Bill, I rented my place in New York. And he goes, uh-huh. And I said, and it's right down the block from you. And he put his arm around me and said, Coach, that don't mean we're going out for beers. And now looking back, I'm so grateful to him that he said that to me.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think it would have been a different experience had I been going out for beers with him.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it. It's tragic. There's a lot of tragedy there.
Oh, boy, is there ever. Actually, that's a pretty good segue, interestingly to me anyway, into your career in barbecue.
Oh, yeah?
Because we have someone who becomes enormously successful in the television sitcom world and is working on a show that was called the greatest sitcom in history, right?
I have that award right upstairs here.
Yeah.
Greatest sitcom of all time, yes.
And you have done things since, of course, that I talked about it in the intro, but I want to get back to some food here.
Please.
Because obviously, sir, you have become an aficionado. And by the way, I'm very disappointed that your Barbecue Hall of Fame trophy is not there beside you.
It's not visible, no. It's not. It weighs 45 pounds and it's sitting on a shelf in New York City.
Oh, okay. All right.
So sorry, but we can describe it if you want, real quickly.
Well, sure.
It's a wooden block with my name engraved on it and my year of being inducted into the Hall of Fame. There's a brass ring of fire, of flames licking up.
Ooh.
Not actual flames.
Yes. Right.
And then rising from the middle of that ring of fire is a bronzed rack of baby back ribs.
I love it.
This is what they hand out.
Yeah.
And it's big and it weighs a lot. And when I saw them bring it out on the stage, I turned to one of the board members of the Kansas City Barbecue Society, who we're all friends now, and said, how am I supposed to get that back to New York? And she looked at me and said, ain't my problem. So, yes, I have a trophy.
How did this come about, first of all?
It was really linked to my writing career because I was working on a new series with the former Senator Al Franken.
Right.
And 15-year alumnus of Saturday Night Live.
Right.
He had met me because the staff of the Cosby Show, in the writing staff, in the summertime, you know, our studio was either in Brooklyn or in Long Island City. but in the summertime, we got to just write before the actors showed up for work. And Lorne Michaels lent us the conference room of SNL in Rockefeller Center. So we could really feel like we were in show business. And Al Franken and a lot of the actors, Phil Hartman and others, used to come in and walk past us. And Franken, being Al, he would stop at the writer's table of the Cosby Show and start pitching episodes. As you can imagine, none of them useful.
Yeah.
And that's how we became friends. And so he invited me to co-author a series that would star him for NBC called Late Line. And we began a writing partnership that to this day actually is still here because we still work on stuff together occasionally. We began to create this series and we did it up here, only feet from where I'm sitting, the porch. We would work outside on the porch. And one day he saw this Weber kettle grill. I knew nothing about barbecue. Ohio is a grilling state.
Yep.
Steaks, fish, not so much fish, vegetables, burgers, hot dogs. Al saw this kettle grill that was unused because I didn't know what to do with grilling. And he said, "Why is that thing so shiny?" And I said, "Well, I kind of bought it a few months ago." And he said, "You know that I'm actually considered the greatest grillmeister in New England." And I went, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, I make the best ribs in the tri-state area." Now, claiming the best ribs in Connecticut, whoa. And at the time, not so big a thing to crow about.
Yeah.
But he said, "We're going to make my ribs." And we did. We marinated these spare ribs overnight in garbage bags filled with garlic and sugar and soy sauce. Just pounds of this stuff in these hefty bags with the spare ribs. And then he had me get the grill real hot, like a lot of charcoal. And he grilled the ribs like they were steaks. Over and over on the flames, turning. And after about 40 minutes, they were done. And they were dark brown, like a dark mahogany color. I couldn't chew them. They were so tough. He ate his and he ate all mine. And a switch went off in my head, which is, these are the worst things I'd ever had. Why is barbecue a beloved cuisine?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you make them right? And then one thing led to another. And I ended up getting on a plane and flying to Kansas City because I found a teacher. That's how it all started.
Oh, wow. So how many years later?
Was I in the Hall of Fame?
yeah, well, to the point where you have become an accomplished pitmaster yourself.
Yes. I began cooking. First thing I did was I got the cheapest piece of equipment, which is called a Weber Smoky Mountain, a bullet smoker, they call them.
Yep.
And well, you've seen them. They have that kind of shape.
Eggy shape.
That's right. Eggy shape. And they can be electric, but you can also put charcoal in the bottom ring and then a water pan to make it an indirect cooker so that the fire is not directly touching the meat, which is the key to barbecue. Mm-hmm. Keeping the temperatures at around 225, 250. And I began to learn to cook the stuff and would go with my friend Paul Kirk in Kansas City. I would meet him at a contest. And at certain contests, like the national contest in Kansas City, I would meet other people. And that led to more cooking. And then I did an event in New York City. I wasn't known at all, really, for doing it. But I was cooking with Paul Kirk. And I ran into a guy named Chris Lilly. And Chris Lilly is really the Mozart.
The real deal.
Of pork. Mm. He had married into the Big Bob Gibson family in Decatur, Alabama. He was a pharmaceutical salesman. And he married in, and he had a gift. And I started doing a radio show with Al Franken about going out in America to find the best barbecue and people who hate Al Franken. That was the theme. And I would be in New York City and we debate. And the place that Al liked the best for our debates was Decatur, Alabama. And Chris became my next teacher. And then things just took off from there because then it became a TV series, BBQ Pitmasters.
This was BBQ Pitmasters, which, by the way, folks, is still running on various modes on streaming platforms where you live.
I would recommend to the audience season 1 of BBQ Pitmasters, which appeared originally on TLC.
Mm-hmm.
And there are 8 episodes, and you'll have a good time.
Oh, yeah. I watched it. It's great fun. It's great fun.
Glad you did.
But at the same time, in your travels, you have acquired not only the knowledge, but also characters along the way.
Yes. There are a lot of, barbecue, especially the competition world, is a true subculture. And a lot of the ones that are the winning ones, they know each other. It's like NASCAR, but with heavier people.
Right.
And they got their equipment. They got their, their gadgets and their equipment and their styles.
Everybody's got his own. Yeah.
Everyone has their own methods. And occasionally you'll even see a guy start a fire with lighter fluid, which is completely verboten.
Anathema. Yeah.
You might as well take a piss on it. It's terrible. Don't do that. I didn't name any brands, but I just don't do it.
Yeah.
They all come from distinct traditions of barbecue, methods, and, there's no one right way to do it. But people always say to me, like, well, what region do you like? And the truth is, it's all about the execution, the low and slow execution of meat done to the point of great tenderness and succulence. And that's the skill. And whatever you do is the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
It's a very democratic thing because good is good in barbecue.
However it's done. Yeah.
However it's done. Like there are people at these contests that cook on trash cans. There's a guy who shows up at some of these national contests. He's fashioned a toilet into a smoker. Who's going to eat those ribs?
Yeah, right. Well,
not me, but it's a little thing he does.
Yeah.
Anything that you can do that allows you to control heat and smoke, you do. And that has no single way to do it correctly. Now that we all get our favorites, we all start to really gravitate toward one method. And I've done that. That's happened to me in the last 20 years. Traveling the country and getting to see how everyone cooks and making friends, Yeah. It's been a great enhancer to my life.
Oh, obviously. Obviously it has.
Yeah.
And not just an enhancer, but an integral part of your life.
Totally.
That goes forward.
Yeah. I had one when we were casting for BBQ Pitmasters. The first one, we were at a contest in Mobile, Alabama. And there was a Texas guy there who they all knew. He was famous. He's in my second season. Johnny Trigg. He's actually also in the. He's in the
first. He's in the first.
He's in the first season. And big personality.
Yeah.
Loud, tall guy. And, the rumor we started about him was he carries a gun in his boot, and he never denies it. So we're casting, and people say you got to go to Johnny Trigg. And I go, all right, I'll go ask him. And he says, don't come over here with your cameras and your Hollywood ways. Don't even think about it, Buster. And then he goes well, what are you coming over here to talk to me about? I said, well, I think you might want to be in the show. And what was his reaction? Grabbed me by the lapels and threw me up against the side of a car and started to... I was laughing so hard because I wasn't hurt. I was laughing that's he started going off about how he got screwed by the Food Network and he hates all of us and we need to get out of it. It was great.
Theater.
It was so live and authentic.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I'm thinking to myself, when I'm, dusting off my coat, I got to get this guy in the show.
Oh, absolutely.
But no. But then wherever we were filming that season prior to his season, he would show up and he would stand behind the ropes that we had to put up to do the show and watch. And I waited and I'd chat with him occasionally and he'd tell me what we were doing wrong.
Yeah, of course.
And proud Texan. And then I called him and he said no. And then he confessed to Chris Lilly, who was part of this. He said, they're not letting us use recipes or pre-made rubs. And I work off of bottled rubs and I got my recipes written down. So I ain't doing it. So we finally talked him into it.
Yeah. Great.
Make your own rub. Come on.
Yeah, because he's a major character. Yeah.
And then he's gotten so much out of it. Now he'll knock someone down trying to get in front of a camera. He's hilarious. He's really embraced that people recognize him from the show.
Yeah. Oh,
and that show that he was on that season, and he was on subsequent seasons where the show changed into more of a game show. But on that first documentary series, he which runs all the time on one of those Discovery networks.
We could do an entire episode on barbecue alone, but since we don't have that time, I have a concluding question that I always ask my guests, and I have a feeling I know, I maybe know, or maybe I don't know the answer, but it's the following. That if you are, or have been in a situation where you're sitting down to a meal, or you're walking through a food court, or you're in a restaurant or whatever, and there's a smell or a taste or an occasion in which food is prepared that takes you back to when you were a boy, what would that moment be? That is that moment in your childhood.
We used to have to whine and fight with our mom to get her to make us hamburgers. Because that's not what my kids eat, she would say. We had tongue.
Yes, so did I, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Finally, she would relent and make hamburgers. And when I smell anything that is similar in aroma and in sound to her hamburgers, I'm completely, I lose it.
Yeah. Interesting. Sometimes it's the simplest things.
Yeah. It was what was behind, because that wasn't, and I set my mom up as not really loving,
Oh, no, not at all. You did. No. She sounds very,
but that was love.
Yeah.
Like, she had just total disdain for this cuisine, but for us, she'd make it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
I still needed therapy.
and a bit of it. Yes.
And a bit of it.
From what I've been told. John Markus. Oh, and also I'm gonna after we're off the recording, I'm gonna ply you for a recipe.
Please do. Okay.
Because I get a recipe from all of our guests that we put on the website.
That would be great. I can supply that. And one other thing I want to say before we go.
Sure.
Is that to any one of your listeners, because I feel we spent a lot of time on writing. I was very happy to do that.
No.
But those who are interested in just starting to experiment and get into it, I would say Paul Kirk, my original teacher, he wrote a book years and years ago called Rubs and Sauces by Paul Kirk. It really is like a Bible in how to make a basic rub, which is an inner part, and how to smoke and how to make a sauce, and doing it all homemade, which he really
I will definitely include this in the podcast because a lot of my listeners and viewers do, take things from the show and use them. So,
and if they have any questions for me, please encourage them to ask. And, as far as cooking,
how can they ask?
They can email me if they want.
Okay. At
my name @me.com. In other words, John Markus @me.com.
Very generous of you, John.
Put your show in the subject and I'll know it's from one of your listeners. I'd love to.
Oh, great. And with that, John Markus, thank you so much for joining me on Cooking by Heart.